I ran a nearly 300K 4x pot bluff versus rival Andy with king high. From the outside, my all-in looks like total spew. And pre-flop, it definitely was. But a great river card flipped the script and allowed me to engage Andy in a leveling war. That's when I decided it was time to go kamikaze. Let's jump into the full analysis for my upcoming upswing course. Hey guys, back for another one. This one is a 1-2-4-800 with a $400 ante. We had the legend Phil Ivey in this game, so we were playing a little bit bigger here. The focus of this one is going to be some atrocious pre-flop play leading to a unique opportunity by the river. Let's jump right into it here. We have JR making a 3x raise with a standard hand to do so, an offsuit Broadway. Dustin calls in blind 2 of 4. Andy then makes a peculiarly small 3-bet to 8,000 here in the third of 4 blinds. And now I am in the straddle here, and I have a hand that needs to be instantly mucked, of course. This hand should not even be defended if Andy were to call. And so what do I do instead? I go ahead and make it 26,000. JR quickly gets out of the way. Dustin folds, and now it's on Andy. And what does he do? He decides to defend. Okay, I'm going to go back just a bit here so we can see all 4 players' cards. There we go. And we can chat a little bit about this. So obviously JR's initial raise is fine. Dustin in blind 2 of 4. This is not a particularly exciting spot to call with 2 players left behind, especially when those 2 players are pros in Andy and I. Jack 9 suited, pretty strong hand. I wouldn't really be looking to fold. I would mostly look to 3-bet here, but mixing call a small amount of the time, I guess, is fine here in a general sense, but in this configuration, I don't really like it. We've talked about this a lot, so I just kind of want to keep it moving here. Let's talk about Andy's 3-bet size. We're going to dive kind of deep into this. This sizing, generally speaking, I do not like. I think this should be much, much bigger. Something like between 5 and 6x that 2.4 open. So maybe something like 14K is what I would be looking to make it here. You'll note that all of Andy, Dustin, and JR are extremely deep. This is what dreams are made of when you are playing very big, very deep stack poker against admittedly 2 pretty loose, pretty splashy wrecks in Dustin and JR. I am convinced Andy probably knows this, right? So let's talk about my decision here before we go back to Andy's 8K in a minute. Over the years, I had very often seen Andy go ahead and ISO light, especially when it was wrecks and especially when I was behind both of them, kind of trying to ISO me out of the pot and keep them in the pot with like pretty decent hands, let's call it, or above average hands, especially when he used this small sizing, right? So let's put this all together. We have some very wide ranges from the button in JR and the big blind in Dustin, not just because of their player types, but of course their seating, their positions at the table in this hand, button and big blind. They're both wrecks. Dustin in particular was excellent for the game. JR, certainly a smart person, but somewhat new to Deep Stack Live No Limit. Andy has me behind, and he uses this small sizing. That's like 5 different variables that led me to just feel like this was an absolute slam dunk. Andy does not have a huge hand here, right? So I just felt like it was quite rare that Andy had something like 2 jacks plus or maybe something like ace king, right? So is my play okay based on that? Hell no. That's a huge takeaway for those of you who lean towards always looking for opportunities to be a hero pre or always looking for opportunities to be involved, etc. Right? This is a critical guardrail and one that I ignore in this hand, but one that has overall made me so much money. Once I started sort of studying really deeply in the late 2010s, is understanding these guardrails and utilizing them to stay sort of within a reasonable range, right? So if I have all these different reads that I've just sort of talked about on just the Andy not being super strong, that is, I can definitely mix hands like ace deuce suited, king 7 suited, king queen off, 6-5 suited. Of course, a hand like that works nicely for board coverage, right? Maybe instead of sort of the theory approved amount of those that we 4-bet, like 10, 20%, depending on the exact hand, Maybe we do it more like 50% with those hands because we just feel so confident Andy's weak here, right? But we do not, under any circumstance, play hands that are much worse than that, let alone King 5, which isn't even in the range of a hand that can ever play here in this spot. This is absolute total spew, and you should do this never, right? This is going to be a review for a lot of you, but some of you maybe who've watched me over the years or whatever and assumed that there was some sort of brilliance behind this. I would argue there very much was not. Now, of course, there were some very strong reads that just so happen to be dead wrong. But even if those reads I think are bulletproof, I do not like this, right? And also, to be clear, I did not have a bulletproof read here. And I'm not even just saying this because we're looking at two kings from Andy. I felt pretty confident, but not certain in this, right? Now, I don't think I'd ever seen Andy use this like trap sizing, if you will, but I had certainly seen him make some really aggressive adjustments once he figured out something I was up to in the past. And for that reason alone, I couldn't be certain that Andy's range was capped here and never had a really, really big hand, right? In addition to all of that, right? And we've discussed this throughout this course, but I'm talking about Andy here, but it's not about Andy. It's about the regs that you're battling against every day, right? Where, you know, even when you're playing off stream, you see lots and lots and lots of showdowns, right? I am just begging Andy to adjust here, especially on stream where he's just gonna see my cards here 100% of the time, right? So he's gonna figure out like, oh, okay, why does Garrett take a hand that he normally would always just turbo muck here and 4-bet, right? And he's probably going to do some pretty deep soul searching on figuring out how I knew he was light, and he's going to do something differently next time. I am convinced that is exactly what happened here, where a situation similar to this had happened previously. He pieced it all together and he's like, okay, the next time, like I have aces and kings here, I'm using this 3x sizing, even if I normally would make it more like a 6x sizing or something like this, right? I can't know any of this for sure. And this is sort of, I think, as always, one of the most fascinating things about poker, where you get to see the cards, but so much is left unsaid. And you better believe Andy and I are, of course, never going to chop it up later to like check our assumptions or something like that. But I'm convinced, to be clear, that Andy was willing to sacrifice a bunch of EV here, make this very small sizing versus the Rex, specifically to outlevel me. I think he basically had already figured all of this out. And for that, kudos to Andy for one, but also like just some really cool stuff going on here, and hopefully really gives you guys a feel for the levels and the layers, to high stakes poker, especially against recurring opponent. And I think we've already touched on this, but when it gets back to Andy, I like his flat. I think 5-betting against most people here, 400 big blinds deep is just too thin. Against me, certainly a viable option. We've talked actually in early hands in this course about how Andy should probably have built some 5-bet ranges against me in certain situations. But given the fact that Andy, I think it's likely, assumes I'm just full of shit here so often, just playing his hand as a call and a trap, out of position with already a lot of money in this pot, almost 60K, strikes me as clearly best, which is of course what he does. Okay, let's move on to the flop here after he puts this money in. I decide to make a small bet, 15K or only 26% of the pot. And then Andy makes a pretty standard call. Let's chat about all of this. First of all, this is a great flop for me in position as the 4-better. I, in theory at least, have way more, or potentially am the only one with ace-ace, and potentially I might play ace-ace exactly like this as a 4-bet. I certainly have more 7x that I'm bluffing with. This isn't me. This is someone who's like playing more theoretically sound, if you will, right? The fact that I have king 5 off is neither here nor there, because all of the opponents you're playing against are going to be doing some stupid shit like 4-betting king 5 off, or at least very rarely they're going to, right? So we're speaking about someone's sort of more reasonable, more balanced, better constructed 4-bet range in my shoes when you're Andy facing this flop c-bet, right? With all of that said, again, that player, or me, we'll call it, is going to have way more 7x, and I think potentially a similar amount of jack-jack, right? This is very, very dependent on what the straddle or the player in my position's macro strategy is pre-flop. Is it 4-bet or fold only? Is there a flatting range? As you guys well know, I certainly certainly would have a 3-bet flatting range in position, super deep against Andy, with 2 wrecks behind me, not wanting to always shut them out of the pot, right? In this exact spot with 2 jacks, it's obviously interesting, close, etc. I probably think jacks specifically is a hand that really kind of just wants to 4-bet here. If I call here with 2 jacks, I have to assume JR as well as Dustin, who called the initial raise, are extremely likely to call the 3-bet as well. And now I have 2 jacks going 4 ways to the flop, a spot that's going to be very difficult to win the hand unless I flop a straight in that situation, right? Okay, let's move on to my C-bet here. So much of this stuff are things we've kind of touched on throughout the course already here. I want to try to keep it moving. I do not like my 26% C-bet here, period, in practice, in theory, and everywhere in between, right? I will first start by telling you why I did it and give one argument for it. Andy definitely by this point had just been hurt by me a lot in so many hands over the years, that he certainly overfolded early streets versus me kind of a lot to stay out of trouble and not have to deal with sort of difficult decisions. That definitely cost him EV. He bled EV all over the place once he sort of started incorporating that strategy. But it does, of course, help one to not make big mistakes when your range is just way more beefy, way stronger, when you are continuing against aggressive, tough players, right? So what am I saying here? The point is maybe I get him to fold a hand like ace queen of hearts in a situation like this. I'm not totally sure, but that was kind of the thought, right? But I think on balance, I guess I should say, versus a quarter C-bet, I think Andy was probably quite likely to call me with pocket 9s and even a hand that's not as good as pocket 9s, like ace king off in this situation. And so ultimately, I'm not really accomplishing much of anything here. This is especially true if Andy doesn't even defend a hand, like let's say ace 10 of spades, right? Which is one of the few hands I can get him to fold here, or maybe 5-6 of clubs, right? If he's not even calling the 4-bet with those hands, now what hands is he even folding, right? Arguably, potentially nothing. And as we'll talk about when we get to the turn, I wasn't planning on double barreling this spot. So this is all kind of a disaster, right? Let me give you some more reasons why I don't really like this C-bet. King 5 off, of course, has very minimal equity, right? If Andy has aces or kings, I'm basically dead. If he has the 8s through queens, I only have 3 outs. And if that king hits, I'm not liable to make very much money. Obviously, my range looks somewhat ace-king heavy, so that king isn't going to get me paid. It's not hidden in any way, shape, or form. And again, I've touched on this, but I didn't think Andy was calling 4-bets very wide against me at this point, which made me lean towards thinking his range was quite strong. A lot of pocket aces through pocket 8s in this situation. Maybe something like king, queen suited or whatever that would fold, but just not very much I think that can ever really fold, right? So put this all together. In theory land, this is such a good flop that I should just bet, right? And usually use a big sizing, maybe something like 3/4 pot, something like that. But in exploit land, which is, of course, where I always want to be playing first and foremost, especially against someone who I have, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of hours of streaming hands with alone, and much more than that off stream, I just need to put $0 in this pot, period. And I think it's also worth pointing out here that the theoretically sound, go ahead and C-bet your whole range here, that assumes I have a well-constructed, balanced 4-bet range with a good amount of queen, queen plus, and a few bluffs mixed in. Obviously, that's not what's going on here. I just have infinite trash. So because of that, I just need to check kind of a lot, to say nothing of the fact that Andy's range is probably a little bit or even a moderate amount tighter than what GTO would probably dictate here in terms of defending against the 4-bet. Out of position, right? Let's move on. Andy's call. This is good in theory as well as an exploit. You don't really need a raising range here. The main reason, of course, as we've talked about, is Andy's at a huge EV disadvantage in this situation, and he doesn't really have many 7x hands. Again, in theory, he should certainly have a little bit of 8-7 and 7-6 suited. In practice, I'm not sure he has much of it, given everything else I've talked about. But even then, even if he should have it a little, you definitely do not want to be defending against a 4-bet every time with every 8-7 suited and 7-6 suited, but you do want to defend with it a little bit. of the time. We've talked about this sort of in some early videos, maybe 1 and 4, something like this, just so you can have some okay board coverage when playing, 400 big blinds deep to start the hand, right? That's quite a wild tangent. Let's get back to it. The point is Andy doesn't have very many nutted hands here outside of Jack's full, a hand, of course, that feels just fine, slow playing as well. And then as an exploit, why should Andy call? Obvious. He knows that I don't have shit a lot here. Is this kind of what I'm thinking? Now, of course, he doesn't know on the flop. I could have just gotten lucky and mashed a 7 or whatever the case. But all of these things, I think, make it very, very clear Andy should go ahead and just call here. Making a thin value raise with 2 kings does not strike me as a particularly appealing decision. Moving on to the turn here. We get a total brick, and just studying Andy on the flop, again, he doesn't give something specific away, but you just have such a good feel for someone when all you do is play with them over and over and over again for thousands and thousands of hours. And I just really felt like he liked his hand. Of course, this could be some ace king, some pocket 8s through pocket 10s, but my instinct in this spot was it was even better than that I was looking at something like aces through jacks a good bit of the time, right? Put that together where I have very minimal or almost zero equity against especially that stronger range, and the hand is over. Nothing really to talk about. And I was going to check twice and be very, very frustrated with myself, mostly from my pre-flop play, but also for spewing another really nonsensical c-bet as well. Okay. Then we get the Jack of Diamonds and everything changes. I now have new life. You see Andy goes ahead and checks here, and I decide to go for the kamikaze all-in bluff here of about 3.5x pot, or 300K. All right, let's talk about all of this. The first thing I just want to briefly point out here is I think this is a perfectly fine spot for Andy to go ahead and bet his hand. He can be bluffing sometimes, at least in theory, with like some missed straight draws, the 10-9, 10-8, 9-8 suited, potentially that whiffed. Maybe his worst hands like ace queen of hearts can go ahead and bluff, trying to get ace king to fold. So I think betting here is probably what I would usually do in this spot. But I totally understand why Andy checked. This card is definitely kind of scary. And given sort of what I suspect he thought about my hand the whole time, it kind of just makes sense for him to go ahead and check, right? So that's a very long-winded way of saying that if I were Andy, I'd go ahead and block maybe something like a third of the pot with a hand like 2 kings, and then again mix in a little bit of the bottom of my range, getting a really sick price, trying to get ace king to fold when I'm only making a third of the pot. That's what I generally think is best. But I think given the dynamics at play, I think Andy's check here is just fine. And it's certainly what I would expect him to do just based on prior history, with his ace through pocket 8s range, all of that stuff, right? So let's talk about me. Honestly, I wasn't even thinking about this river card hitting. Usually I'm much better about thinking about every card that could hit the river and what I could potentially do. I remember in this moment when we were at the turn, I was just thinking about how disgusted I was with myself and how the hand was over. And if I mash a king or whatever on the end, I would think about sort of what I wanted to do at that point, right? But then this jack hits and sort of a light bulb just goes off in my head. And I'm just like, oh, wow, okay. I think this is a really cool and unique opportunity to go for it here, right? One of the main reasons why I think this works is because Andy and I are so deep here. Again, this is like 350%-ish of the pot, this overbet all in. I think if I only have 2x pot here, it doesn't work. It's no good. Another reason I think this works really well is because very rarely did Andy and I play this big, right? Usually games him and I played specifically together, the big blind was often 200 or 400 more of the time. And so because of that, this 300K bet just in and of itself is just very, very big. And Andy, throughout the course of my career, without question, had seen in so many spots like this where the game gets big, I was able to just get away with making such egregious, greedy overbet bets for value and got paid off that it just felt like for metagame and leveling reasons that this just really kind of fit, quite nicely. Let's talk about sort of range construction here. I think this is important too. Again, we've talked about how I think Andy mostly kind of tried to stay away from me at this point. So I'm not even convinced Andy defends here versus my 4-bet with ace jack suited. I think especially with like king jack, queen jack suited, which is definitely something he would do pre-flop, that is 3-bet and potentially use a small sizing versus the Rex to shut me out of the pot. I feel even more confident those hands, king jack, queen jack, jack 10, jack 9 suited, would be quite likely to fold pre-flop, right? So the point is I think he just does not have nearly enough jack X here, certainly way less, I think, than theory would generally dictate in this situation. And I also just felt like it was quite likely he would bet it, that like he's just really hoping to get called by all sorts of things, whether I make a hero call with some sort of ace high type hand, or I have, whatever, pocket 8s through pocket queens, and potentially make a hero call, something like that, right? But I just didn't put him on much jack X, and for the same reasons to an even greater extent. I really didn't put him on 7X. I didn't think he could have the 7-8 suited or the ace 7 suited much at all, if ever. And then let's talk about maybe one other hand. How about ace king of diamonds in particular? I think he probably bets that hand as well. I think he probably defends with it on the flop, but he probably just bets with it. And even if he doesn't, which I think is reasonable too, now that I'm thinking about it more, I'm not really sure how he plays ace king of diamonds here, but it mostly doesn't matter, right? Because that hand sucks at this point too when facing a 3.5x pot bet. It's obviously just a pure bluff catcher as well. And it's just a very similar hand to pocket kings. And one thing I felt like I knew about Andy very well was he wasn't the type to go, all right, well, ace king of diamonds is really high up in my range, I'm going to call. That's just not really the way like a longtime live pro thinks. They're always just looking for different kinds of reasons, I guess, to potentially call or not call, right? So very long way of saying, like, first of all, ace king, ace queen of diamonds, a very small part of his total range here, and it's only a couple combos. But I just felt like those hands were quite likely to go ahead and fold as well. Okay, let's go back just a little bit after Andy checks sort of the decision-making process for me, just kind of to be a bit more well-rounded in this hand. I think once it gets to this spot, I have two sizings here. I can go 2/3 with my aces through queens. Again, very dependent on if or who and at what frequency I would go ahead and check aces through queens on this turn against some opponents who were non-believers against me. When I have 2 kings or 2 aces here, like I'm always just quickly trying to get the money in, right? But against Andy, who played, a bit more cautiously against me, maybe it makes some sense to check my aces and kings sometimes, and then queens, of course, is a hand that, I don't think against him I'm just like snap getting 3 streets of value all in against, not even close. So queen, I guess, a lot, and then potentially ace. I think with all of those hands, I like 2/3 here on the end, putting a lot of different hands I think he can have in a box, even stuff as weak as, ace king, something like that, right? I think it's at least worth mentioning too that might be too wide for some of you. Some of you may play 4-bet pots where the ranges are a bit more snug, and potentially 2 queens here is a little bit too thin to value bet. Others of you, watching this are like, oh man, most of the players in my pool are just snap calling me with ace high on this double paired board after I take the bet check and then bet line. And if so, of course, then go ham with 2 queens, go ham with 2 10s if you are, that confident in it, right? And then in addition to the 2/3, I think the only other sizing, and I think we absolutely have to use this sizing, is all in. And so we definitely, with at least most of our Jack X range, need to just go all in here, right? Whether we just do it with all of our Jack X range, of course, just depends on our opponent, whether we think they're going to call. If we want to play balanced enough that we put some of the Jack X in the 2/3 range to induce an all-in shove. A lot of different variables here, but I'm mostly usually just focused on, what's my opponent going to call with 2 queens or 2 10s in this spot, which are, I think probably some of the most likely hands in this spot. Ultimately, I thought that Andy had a pretty strong hand here. I've kind of touched on this throughout. I'm not going to elaborate on it again. So 2/3 just felt pretty spewy. Like I'm kind of just giving the money away. And it just felt like his 2 kings, 2 queens are just going to sigh and call very, very often against that sizing, right? Let's chat about my blockers here. When thinking about this all-in sizing, they're mostly irrelevant. And I would say most blockers are mostly irrelevant in this situation. I just didn't think Andy had much, let's say, king jack of spades. If Andy defended king jack of spades, and I already touched on why I don't think he would, then this combo is pretty bad for it, because you really want to block at least one of the other combos of king jack. Because I have the king of hearts and the jack of hearts is on the board, that means the king jack of spades, clubs, and diamonds are all still available. You'd like to block one of those three at least in that situation. How about the five of diamonds, right? If some of you are like, oh, well, you're blocking a flush. No, is the answer, right? Let's break that down for a second. First of all, and most obviously, this is a double paired board, and going all in here is, of course, representing a hand much stronger than a flush, and also we're generally trying to get the limited number of flushes Andy can have to fold anyway. Also relevantly, the five of diamonds should be just a inconsequential card, right? Is Andy even defending ace five of diamonds pre-flop versus the 4-bet? I think not. Is he defending ace five of diamonds on the flop? I think not, right? So it's very important whenever you're thinking about blocker considerations that we go deep on it and make sure that we ask ourselves, are we sure the five of diamonds is a useful blocker? And ultimately the answer is it's not, right? Okay, and finally, we touched on this already, but it is just so central to not only my decision in this hand, but so many hands I play where a lot of money goes in the pot. And you've heard me say it again and again. I challenge all of you to make this a central part of your decision-making process when you're thinking about going ham and bluffing all in this spot. The first thing I think most people are thinking about when they're in Andy's shoes here is who bluffs here. Not only who bluffs here in this node where it's a 4-bet pot and they c-bet, then check, then overbet all in a spot where they definitely can rep some Jack X hands that were bluffing pre-flop, right? But you want to ask yourself, how is your opponent going to interpret this bet, right? Is your opponent going to think, as I believed Andy would think, okay, Garrett's trying to take advantage of his brutal image here. He's just getting greedy with a Jack X, and he knows that I know that his image is trash, right? Or is it kind of the opposite? Is he thinking something along the lines of, man, it is really hard for Garrett to have a jack or a 7 here, so I'm probably going to call? Or is he thinking, man, this guy's just too crazy, I'm just going to call, right? Or is he just playing the leveling game at such an elite level that he knows I'm on level, let's say 5, and so he jumps up on level 6, right? There are so many different things this could be about that ultimately the details of this don't really matter, although I did give you sort of what I believed Andy's leveling thought process would be. But I would challenge you again to at least play the game. Okay, let's talk about Andy's decision here from some sort of framework that goes beyond leveling, right? The first thing is just as an exploit. I just think overwhelmingly you should just almost always fold against almost everyone when you're in Andy's shoes here. I can't tell you how many times I saw like average recs, let's say, guys that played way too loose, way too spewy, but were thinking or somewhat thinking, and they just mash all their chips in the pot here, and then like a bad reg or another rec or whatever just like calls them here with the overpair and loses, right? Just so few people find this bluff. Good pros, mediocre recs, almost all of them just kind of have it always here. To be honest, the only kind of couple guys who could ever be bluffing here is just someone who's just insanely bad, or someone who's usually like a very big winner, someone who's just really, really tough, you know? And I think if we're trying to look for some sort of guardrail, some sort of theoretical framework when you're in Andy's shoes here on how to approach this situation, I think the first hand you call with is aces. If you are trapping here pre, which I definitely think Andy would and could and would in this spot, given the dynamic that was going on pre-flop. Why? Obviously, aces is just like one of the strongest hands he can have here for one, but it also does a good job of unblocking bluffs. So if you assume your opponent is playing, or at least attempting to play with some sort of theoretical framework, you might assume when they have the ace-king, the ace-queen, maybe even the ace-4 of spades, that they go ahead and check those hands. But when they have the king-queen off, when they have the 10-9 suited, whatever the case may be, those are the times that they go all in. Obviously, In that scenario, 2 aces unblocks those bluffs. I think it makes it a very clearly more appealing hand to call down with from a theoretical framework. And then otherwise, just really, really close, right? And you probably just want to mix kings through eights here. Often you're not really going to know what cards are blocking bluffs in this spot. When you're Andy on this double paired board, it's just a really, really messy situation, right? And so maybe one heuristic you can potentially use is math, right? When in doubt, just do the math and defend accordingly. And so against this sizing, again, to just use even round numbers, I think Andy should call with about the top 20% of his range. If he's playing a theoretically balanced range that gets to this river, that top 20% is going to look like Jack X, 7X, Ace King, and Ace Queen of Diamonds. Let's just pause there and just point out that all of those hands I listed, even combined, make up so little of his entire range, right? So those ones just immediately strike me as like just snap calls. And then I think also aces through queens, right? Again, it's very, very dependent on how your opponent's playing. How Andy in this case is playing aces and kings. If he's just defending and never 5-betting aces and kings, then maybe it's just aces and kings you call with and you fold queens. I'm just giving you sort of a rough feel for it, right? But in a balanced range, Andy also has a bunch of ace king high, ace queen high in this situation. Maybe some bad hands he decided not to bluff here with, like 10-9 of hearts. He just has like a lot of stuff that he can go ahead and fold, right? So that's one way to approach it. Ultimately, no matter what, this is incredibly difficult for Andy or anyone who puts you in this box in this situation. So I wanted to try to give you at least a little something in terms of how you could potentially approach this, right? Andy's been a real trooper kind of handling everything I've thrown at him at the court in this course. You know, he's definitely a nice person, one of the good guys in poker. And I want to apologize to him that I've been so tough on him, you know, throughout this course. I ultimately, as I've touched on, just don't know how to make it otherwise, right? I just have so many incredibly interesting hands that I've played against him heads up. And you combine that with the many, admittedly, leaks he had from 2017 to 2022. He might be a lifetime stronger of a player now, 4 or 5 years later. That it just made for a lot of compelling spots, and I thought made for a lot of potential teaching opportunities for you to apply to the regs in your game. Ultimately, I think Andy played a lot of above average, small or maybe medium winning regs that you would see in your games in mid stakes or, you know, upper mid stakes, 10-20-ish type no limit sort of games. And this is why there were just so many hands sort of featuring him, right? Okay, let's just go ahead and look at the results now. Enough about all of that. Obviously, he takes quite a while to think about this. Huge pot. And then ultimately does go ahead and lay it down, fortunately. I just want to make a point here, and I really am not trying to pat myself on the back to do this, but so often in poker, a sample size of 1 means very little or potentially nothing. In this very unique spot that's going to come up very rarely, and we're putting so much stock into the leveling, and we see he did end up having sort of a quite strong hand, even stronger than maybe I suspected he had, and he folded it. We can probably pretty safely say, you know, that the assumptions I made in this one were probably correct. You can use that sort of as a tool if you're ever able to see your opponent's hand because you're on a stream or they flip their hand up or whatever the case, right? Again, so often in poker, a sample size of 1 is worth very little or potentially nothing. A bunch of solid tidbits from this one. But if I were to pick a single takeaway, it would be this. Every street of poker is its own thing, a new opportunity to be great. No doubt, I screwed up pre-flop and the flop here. But by the turn, I was able to regroup and make a couple good decisions. I challenge you to do the same. When you misstep, let it go. Forgive yourself and be at your best when the dealer flips over that next card. My book is jam-packed with easy to understand mindset tips like this. Pre-orders are live, links in the description below. You can also hop on the course waitlist there too. More strategy breakdowns and one massive surprise video on the way. See you guys soon.